enthusiast committed to leveraging technology for sustainable innovation, which also skip the important part, uplift individuals in society, not just intellectual innovation for your own fun or good stuff. This is basically with improving the reliability and efficiency of software testing, Selenium, you can bound it, you find web stuff, but that's the topic we're talking here. I'm not going to go ahead and read the bio and so forth because maybe you won't get from the so, without any further, thank you, Muti.
All right. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you guys can hear me properly. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So, okay. So before we start, right, I just need to understand the audience here. How many of you guys are testers, work QA and QA? Oh, okay, cool. All right. How many of you have worked with Selenium for other purposes? All right, cool. Great. So basically, I'll be talking about test automation framework. So this was initially supposed to be a workshop where we are setting up this framework, but then because of some logistic issues, then I just had to convert it into a talk, right? So I want it to be like an interactive talk, not just me in the front here talking. So if you guys think that you can actually add some of the stuff that I'm saying here, that are not making sense, so you can always, feel free to contribute, right? Cool. So basically, I'll just do a small introduction of Selenium and Python, and then I'll talk a bit about software quality, why it's important for you to test, and not only, before release, that's when you want to test your product. And then I'll also talk about some of the design patterns that you can use to create these robust test automation frameworks and how it works. And then I'll cover a bit about automated versus manual testing and why you should opt for automated testing instead of manual. Because, of course, you can't automate everything, right? And then lastly, I'll talk about some reporting tools you can use to give feedback about your testing, right? So basically who I am, as I was introduced here, I currently work as a QA engineer in the banking sector.
Sorry, I'm fixing the lighting because you're benching the camera. Yeah, just
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I've spent the past few years helping teams. This is back in Namibia, so I basically have my own startup, Zunda Technology Park, where I actually mentor developers into contributing to open source communities, right? This way, you don't just get experience, but you can get, practical knowledge and to prepare for whatever interview you'll be having, right? Cool. So we'll start off with software quality, right? Which is actually a broad concept of how a software product is supposed to look like or how it was supposed to behave, right? Because when it comes to quality, it's all about the user requirements, who you are building it for. Will they use it the right way? Or just, the first day after you deploy your application, people are already complaining the application is down, wasn't properly tested, right? So this is why actually software quality is an integral part of software development, basically. So it shouldn't, be sort of like a standalone where we follow the normal SDLC life cycle, right? And testing is usually at the end, right? So what basically happens if you follow that approach of the waterfall model is basically that your technical debt, right, is going to keep increasing. And by the time you discover this defect or this bug, and it's already too much, a lot of time was spent already on the product, you know. So yeah, it's always good to test early, so you get constant early feedback. Any questions or contributions towards software quality from anybody here? Cool. Are we all on the right track? Awesome. So Selenium, I've seen most of you guys, you said already used Selenium before. So basically, it's an open source tool which is used for automating not only tests, right? So you can, for example, I know people who do web scraping with Selenium. So what Selenium basically does is it helps you interact with the web browser. So there's a web driver in Selenium that helps you interact with the web browser. So you just have to quickly write a script, and then you locate elements on a specific web page, and then you can actually just interact with the web page by clicking a play button, right? So, why Selenium, right? Basically, because it's open source, like I said, and then it's also for cross browsing. So basically, if you write the script, let's say, for example, for Edge browsers only, you can also reuse the same script for Brave browser or even Chrome browser, right? And then it also automates web apps. So, like I said, it's not only for testing, but basically for automation. Cool. So why Python? Why would you use Python to automate test cases with Selenium, right? As you guys all know, I mean, this is quite not new info. So it's a high-level programming language, right? We all know what that means, unless maybe somebody doesn't. Yeah, so and as you can see here, right, there's a large community base. I mean, you can see how many people have come to PyCon Africa. You see, this is basically the community base that I'm talking about. So even if you sort of like maybe having troubles, maybe a specific package you're trying to import is not working, you can always reach out to the community. I mean, we are all on the Discord server, right? There's even a specific channel for people who need help. Yeah. So for those of you that will be working with Selenium from now on, you can just, write up there. I'll be able to get a chance and look at your questions. Cool. So this is basically a basic code snippet, as you can all see. So you first need to install Selenium on your machine. Then by running the specific Python install commands. And then once you do that, it doesn't matter in which environment, if it's a virtual environment or a basic physical environment, because when it comes to testing, there are sort of different environments, right? So you have a staging environment, you have basically a production environment and a UAT, right? That's why I actually asked about testing in production because it's quite not, really ideal, right? Because if you break something there, then it's people getting affected real time, right? So this basic code snippet, it's basically just accessing the Facebook page, right? And then, so more at the bottom, there were sort of like interactions. So um, we try to log in into the Facebook page with while providing the info. So should I run through this on the code editor, or it's okay? I can proceed with the presentation because it's almost done, and you guys seem to be, yeah. Yeah. So I know it's directly after lunch, right? So yeah, that's why I'm trying to make it interactive, right? So it's not just me talking. Yeah. So I have a question. I come from like a back end, serverless programming background. For front end developer, how would I solve it? I'm using Python. Using Python to run the steps. Okay. So basically with the Selenium and Python, you can then test the whole end-to-end process, right? Basically what I mean by end-to-end is like I work with a lot of microservices. So the back end is mostly microservices. So then it's kind of hard for Selenium to actually interact because it's mostly for web browsers. And in the back end, there's no, web applications, right? So basically, you can write up like a PyTest, yeah. So which will then target the code coverage of the unit tests that the developers have already implemented there, right? So that way is one of the ways. Or you can use other tools as well, like Playwright, and as well as what's this tool? Yes, Puppeteer. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, So like the challenge is mostly towards the backend, right? Automating the whole backend process. Like I said, I work with a lot of microservices and most of them are event driven. So basically something must happen before that microservice is triggered. So that whole process, where in a way that if whatsoever event was supposed to happen for it to trigger this microservice does not work, then how will you, tolerate that? You see, so that's why it will be actually good for you to try out using Selenium, right? Because there is a way in which you can track progress and record basically for you to recreate the steps of like a failed test, for example. So you can always recreate the same thing that happened. Yes.
How do you decide which, whether you should use Selenium, Ethereum, how do you know which one, why you pick the biggest for Selenium?
Okay, so it's basically depending on your tech stack and also some company policies as well, right? So for me, it was because I love Python, so it's quite easier for me to implement it in Python than using Selenium. Because most of the people I work with, it's normally we use C Sharp, so which is a bit tricky. So Selenium, you can use it for both Python, C Sharp, or even Java. Yeah.
And then the other question I have is obviously the recording of the tests will actually, is there a way that you can automate the recording so that you can go click through the website, for example, and then record the steps that we're taking instead of you manually coding, go find this element or go click on this? Is there a way that you can just record yourself and then convert that into code so that you're able to replicate that?
With Selenium, however, not. But there is a tool, Ranorex. How many of you guys have used Ranorex? Yeah, none of you. Okay, so yeah, Ranorex. So with that one, basically what you do is you go on the website, do some exploratory testing. As you are doing that, it's actually recording your movements on the website, right? And then when you're done, it then generates that video, your whole interaction. But it's totally, it's a drag and drop, so no code writing here. Yes.
Yeah, so I think back in my third year of uni, there was a browser extension powered by Selenium that you could use for that. So you could record and it would actually go through all of that and when you are done, you just you actually export from the one test. That's cool. I don't know if it's still being maintained.
Yeah.
Lots of people use it, but we should check it out and see if it's still there.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah, you see, this is why I actually want this session to be interactive, right? Because I don't know everything. So some of you guys might know some of the stuff, and then you can actually add to the talk. So some of the best practices I will then talk about. Oh, okay. So software quality, which I've actually already talked about. Yeah. So it's basic. Yeah. No, if you are reading from here, then you will not get anything. Yeah. CI/CD. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Definitely, because it will definitely benefit your DevOps, right? Because as you do the changes, mostly it's for regression testing, right? So you have already written the code. All that needs to do is just basically a trigger. For example, you set up a workflow that once a pull request is made to the main branch, then it runs all the tests. You see, so that way you will avoid testing in production. Then you also make sure that the new code that you implemented is not breaking the old code that was already there. So yes, definitely, if you would look into implementing Selenium for regression testing, and then you can easily integrate it into your CI/CD, so continuous development, continuous integration. Cool. So I was talking about regression testing. This is one of the best practices, right? So with Selenium, is that once you write the code, you can always reuse it. You don't have to write new code, right? Because it's the same element that you are interacting with, which is actually why it's good. So let's say you have multiple pages that you need to test, but it's all the same things that you need to test, right? So it will be quite easier for you to recreate all those pages because it's all sort of all similar to each other. And then the shift left testing, this is basically uh, writing test cases first before, before writing the real code. So this is basically when you have like clear defined requirements, then you can start to write out your test cases before the developers start doing the code, right? So they write code that passes the test cases. That way you ensure quality before the work is even started, right? Then, okay. And then I'll talk about some design patterns that I normally work with, and then which ones I've used with Selenium, right? So some of you guys don't even know what design patterns are. Basically, okay, you know what it is, but you don't know what it is. If I'm making sense, yeah? Yeah, so you do use it, but you don't even know what it is, right? So basically, what it is, the blueprint that you can customize to solve a particular design problem, right? What I mean by this is basically, how many of you guys do scaffolding code? Yeah, from time to time, right? So basically, what scaffolding is, it's basically you already have like a code base, and then you just sort of like recreate that code base, sort of following the same implementation, but then you just do a few tweaks or changes here and there, right? So this is where actually most design patterns are formed, right? So we have different design patterns. You guys know any? None. Only the ones you showed that you. Yeah. But yeah, I'll talk about one here, the one that I normally use with Selenium, right? And then the effect of why you should use good design patterns is basically a simple chain may, not cause numerous tests to fail. So basically, imagine you wrote, a whole automation script for the whole web page, and then the guys on the front end, they just changed some few things, and now all of a sudden, all your tests are not working, right? So it's actually good for you to have a good design pattern that can easily handle these scenarios, right? And then it also like gives the frameworks sort of like a backbone. Now that's what I was talking about. For example, if you guys are now onboarding a new person, right? You can just give them access to your code base. They already know like which kind of designs to follow, what are the best practices to use in there, right? Um, yes. Okay, so commonly used design patterns that I was talking about. So the page object model, this one is the one I normally use with Selenium, where you basically have like you have separate logic, right? So there's a logic that tests the logic itself, and then to test the UI, like the responsiveness and all that. So you have them as two separate and not as one as a whole, right? Making sense? Okay, cool. And then you have data-driven testing. So a design pattern that you could use, where you run the same test logic with multiple data sets, right? So with Selenium, it's quite easier for you to do that, right? Because all you have to do is just change the link to your data set, right? And then you just rerun the same test again, because sometimes when it comes to data-driven testing, because we have an expectation of like what we expect, for example, maybe from a form, what kind of data to expect, right? You see, but then what the user uses, I mean, the way a user interprets it, it's totally wrong. You see, so you want to catch those incidences before you actually release your application. This is why that approach will actually work best, right? So, and then there's also keyword-driven testing. where you now define specific keywords, right? Like click, log out, log in, you see. So you already have these words in, let's say, one whole configuration page. This is now as you're implementing the Python with Selenium, right? So you have a specific page where you have all your global variables and all that implemented in one page. So you can always reference them anywhere else in the code, right? Anywhere else in the project, right? And then the singleton, which actually ensures a single instance of WebDriver. This is now for like session managed web applications, right? Where, for example, you're only allowed to interact the session for 30 seconds. If there's no activity, then the session closes, right? Yeah. Any questions? Yeah. 5 minutes. Oh, thank you. Okay, so basically then how do you actually use Selenium, or what is the use of Selenium with Python, right? So once you install the Selenium, there's a web driver package. So that package already knows these keywords, right? Which are actually locators. This is now how you interact with your web page. So they are actually used to identify web elements within web pages. This is now the document object model, right? So we have a few of them here. We have you select by a CSS ID, right? So let's say you have maybe a web page that uses a lot of CSS styling, right? So you can select the CSS ID to find the specific item on the web page, right? Or you can use the CSS class name. So those two fall with CSS. Or you can use by attribute, right? So you find the element name, and then okay, this the DOM structure. I haven't really used it to find the XPath. This is basically, I think, the absolute path, and then the tag name, and then the HTML tag name as well. So these are a few locators that you can use in Selenium, right? So if you would like to continue with this, I have a demo project, right? Basic intro, where I took one of the snapshots above. So it's it's on the GitHub. So I want us to create it together. That's why I actually sort of opted for a workshop and people that wake up. So I wanted us to create it together, then we contribute to it, and then we can definitely reuse it, right? Cool. Yeah, I think, yeah, cool. Yeah, so you can still decide to ask questions or not. Right.
Good timing, but thank you. Good to go. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
Hi, thank you for that. Um, with some testing frameworks, sometimes you can't find the element. Um, maybe an overlay or is some. Have you experienced that using Selenium in some Python there are elements that you simply can't locate on the page?
Yes, I have in existence, right? But now there's like a package that was recently deployed, like an updated package of the different elements, web elements. So because those ones are now focused on Web 3, right? Yeah, so it's a bit more advanced and more updated elements that you can use.
Yeah. Anyone else? Ah,
Something. So with Selenium, sometimes, and with JavaScript framework, sometimes the build output has funny class names or funny. The structure is a bit funny, right? It's authenticated and something. How do you navigate that? Back then, that was my main problem. So you write something, you react to something, the code will end up getting class, you get class names. The structure is funny, but what you put on it, because that's the restructure. That's the way we React automatically. how do you work around that?
Yeah, so that I'll actually bring you back here, right, to design patterns, because sometimes what you're going to implement on this page is something different. What you're going to implement on this page is something different. So it's a best practice if you can use the same design concepts, right? That way it will be easier for you to, even without looking at the code, you already know like, okay, here I'm expecting this, here I'm expecting this, right? Yeah, so that way you are able to sort of generalize your code, and then it's also easier for you to give it to the next person, right?
One more question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, you know, okay.
So I mean, this everything talked about testing. One person can try to maybe Selenium for like other websites and they're like capture all these like bot scales. How do you maneuver around that?
Okay, so like I've said, I've tested like a whole end-to-end process, right? Which means like the beginning until the end, right? So things like capture, there is different call them elements, right? Where you can probably wait, and then you have a bit of manual interaction there, because some things you cannot basically automate them. Yeah. So it's also important for you to understand what can you automate and how far can your automation go, right? Because there's always going to be manual intervention needed, right? Yeah. So if you guys want to get the link to that repository I was talking about, you can just find me anywhere. Then definitely I do that.
There we have it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric.